She ran from her husband's fists and boarded the first train out of the city, unaware the man in the seat beside her controlled half the underworld. For 8 months, Serena had been counting down the days, hiding cash like contraband, learning to read his rage like weather patterns. Tonight, the storm had finally broken her. Tomorrow, she would either be free or dead. She chose to run. The bathroom mirror had a crack running through it now. A spiderweb fracture from where her head had hit the glass. Serena stared at her reflection, split into pieces, and thought, this is what he sees when he looks at me. Something already broken. 8 months. That's how long she'd been planning. 8 months of hiding 20s in the false bottom of a makeup bag no one thought to check. 8 months of memorizing the train schedule like scripture. 8 months of learning the rhythms of Raymond's violence. The way his jaw tightened before his hand swung, the particular silence that meant the whiskey had turned his mood dark, the false tenderness in his voice when he said, baby, like it was a warning. She'd been a law student when he found her. Working doubles at the restaurant where he held his business dinners. He'd smiled at her like she was the only person in the room. He'd said she was too smart to be serving plates. He'd promised to give her the world. What he gave her was a cage with a view. Fairy tales, her grandmother used to say, are just prisons with better furniture. Tonight, the furniture had finally drawn blood. She pressed her fingers to the split in her lip, watched the blood bloom against her dark skin like a secret she couldn't keep anymore. Raymond was snoring in the bedroom, whiskey and rage finally spent. The penthouse was quiet, that expensive quiet that only big money buys. At 3:47 a.m., Serena moved through the dark like a prayer she was afraid to say out loud. She didn't reach for the jewelry he'd bought to apologize. She didn't take the designer bags meant to keep her silent. She grabbed the small duffel she'd hidden behind the winter coats, the burner phone taped inside a boot, and the coat with her grandmother's ring sewn into the lining, the only thing she owned that he hadn't touched. Downstairs, the doorman was on his phone, distracted. She slipped past like smoke. The city was different at 4 a.m. empty. Waiting. Atlanta's street stretched before her like a dare. She couldn't go to the airport. Raymond had connections there, people who smiled at her but reported to him. Instead, she took a rideshare to the train station, paid in cash, and told the driver the first lie a survivor learns to master, I'm just visiting family. The station was a cathedral of strangers. Rolling suitcases and coffee steam and people pretending they weren't running from something. Serena moved through it with practiced invisibility, shoulders rounded, gaze low, step steady. She bought a ticket on the first train leaving the city, the overnight express to New York. Platform 7. She sat with her back to the wall, watching every face that passed. When they called boarding, fear hit her in a single animal wave. What if he woke? What if he tracked her phone? What if his money could turn every exit sign into a dead end? She boarded anyway. There was nowhere to go except forward. The quiet car was nearly empty. Serena collapsed into a window seat, pressed her forehead to the cold glass, and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. She didn't notice the man who settled into the seat beside her until the train began to move. Tall. Sharp black suit that cost more than her monthly salary used to. Neck tattoos climbing above his collar like secrets he didn't bother to hide. Dark hair, clean cut. A face carved from something harder than stone, sharp jaw, sharper eyes. He smelled of sandalwood and something colder, like winter in a country she'd never seen. He carried himself like gravity had signed a contract with his shoes. Like every room he entered already belonged to him. He didn't look at her at first. He looked at the aisle, then at his watch, then at nothing, like a man accustomed to making plans inside his own head that others would simply follow. The train picked up speed. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, and then there was only darkness outside the window. Serena let herself lean against the glass, exhaustion finally winning. But when the train jolted over a rough patch of track, she flinched, and her coat shifted. The blood on her face caught the overhead light. the bruise blooming across her cheekbone. The split lip she tried to hide with her hand. The man in the seat beside her turned his head because of the jolt. And then didn't turn it back. His eyes were the kind that forgot to lie. Dark as obsidian, heavy with thought, sharp as a blade pressed flat against skin. He didn't stare like the curious or the judgmental or the hungry. He stared like a man memorizing a problem he intended to solve. Serena's mouth tried a practiced answer. The one she'd given doctors and doormen and anyone who looked too long. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just tired." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and produced a handkerchief. Silk. Expensive. Monogrammed with initials she didn't recognize. He held it out to her without moving closer, without crowding her space. An offering, not a demand. "No one should bleed alone," he said quietly. His voice was low, accented, Korean, she thought, though his English was flawless. There was no pity in it. No judgment. Just a statement of fact, as if he'd seen enough blood in his life to know the difference between people who caused it and people who survived it. Serena stared at the handkerchief. At him. At the ink climbing his neck, the controlled stillness of his posture, the way he waited without expectation. She should refuse. She should turn away, press herself against the window, become invisible the way she'd learned to be. Strangers weren't safe. Men weren't safe. Kindness always came with a price. But she was so tired. So tired of bleeding alone. She took the handkerchief. The silk was cool against her split lip, softer than anything Raymond had ever given her. She pressed it to the wound and felt something crack open in her chest, not pain, but the absence of it. The strange, terrifying relief of being seen without being owned. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once. Then he shifted his posture slightly. Not toward her, but angled so that his shoulder created a barrier between her and the aisle. A wall she could lean against if she chose. Protection without presumption. "Rest," he said. "It's a long ride to New York." She didn't know his name. She didn't know that he controlled half the underworld, that he'd just come from business in Atlanta that had left blood on someone else's hands, that his organization operated in the shadows between New York and Seoul. All she knew was that for the first time in 8 months, someone had looked at her bruises without flinching, and offered help without asking for anything in return. Serena closed her eyes. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept without dreaming of fists. Before we dive into this story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far this love story traveled. Drop your country in the comments, hit that subscribe button. I read every single one comment here, so please drop your comments now. Let's begin. The blood on her lip had barely dried when Serena made her decision. She sat on the cold bathroom floor, back pressed against the tub, listening to Raymond's footsteps fade down the hallway. The penthouse was silent now, that expensive silence that only money could buy. The kind of silence that swallowed screams. 8 months. She'd been planning for 8 months. It started small. A 20 slipped into the false bottom of a makeup bag he never touched. Then another. Then memorizing the train schedule she'd found crumpled in a coffee shop, smoothing it flat and reading it so many times the words burned into her brain. Platform numbers. Departure times. The overnight express to New York that left at 4:15 a.m. She'd learned the rhythms of Raymond's violence the way animals learn the patterns of predators. The tightening of his jaw when a deal went bad. The particular way he poured his third whiskey, slow, deliberate, dangerous. The false softness in his voice when he called her baby right before his hand swung. She'd been a law student when he found her. 24 years old, working doubles at the restaurant where he held his business dinners, too exhausted to notice the way he watched her. He'd smiled like she was the only person in the room. He'd said she was too brilliant to be serving plates. He'd promised to give her the world. What he gave her was a cage with golden bars. First, he convinced her to take a break from school, just one semester, just until she settled into their new life. Then he moved her away from Chicago, away from her family, away from everyone who knew her. Then the first slap came, followed by apologies so sweet she almost believed them. By the time she understood what he was, it was too late to simply leave. Raymond Price wasn't just wealthy. He was connected. Politicians owed him favors. Police captains played golf at his club. His face smiled from magazine covers while his fists left bruises in places clothes could hide. Tonight, he'd found the browser history on her phone. The searches for women's shelters. The domestic violence hotline number she'd saved but never called. He'd beaten her worse than ever before. And something in Serena had finally cracked, not broken, but cracked open. Like a seed splitting its shell to reach for light. There won't be another chance. The thought was clear as glass. At 3:47 a.m., she moved through the penthouse like smoke. She didn't take the jewelry he'd bought to apologize. She didn't take the designer clothes meant to keep her silent. She grabbed only what mattered, the small bag she'd hidden behind winter coats, the burner phone taped inside a boot, and the coat with her grandmother's ring sewn into the lining. The doorman was distracted, scrolling his phone. She slipped past like a ghost. The rideshare driver didn't ask about her split lip or the bruise blooming on her cheek. He just drove. Serena gave him the address and the first lie a survivor learns to master: "I'm visiting family." The train station was a cathedral of strangers at 4 a.m. Serena moved through it with practiced invisibility, shoulders rounded, gaze low, step steady. She bought a ticket on the overnight express to New York. Platform 7. One way. When she boarded, the fear hit her in a single, animal wave. What if he wakes? What if he tracks me? What if his money turns every exit into a dead end? But the train was already moving, pulling away from Atlanta, pulling away from Raymond, pulling away from the woman she'd been forced to become. Serena pressed her forehead to the cold window and let herself breathe. She didn't notice the man who settled into the seat beside her. Not yet. The quiet car was nearly empty. Serena found a window seat near the back and collapsed into it like a puppet whose strings had finally been cut. Her body ached in places she hadn't let herself feel yet, her ribs where Raymond's foot had connected, her shoulder where she'd hit the wall, the split in her lip that still throbbed with every heartbeat. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and watched Atlanta's lights blur into streaks of gold and white. Then darkness. Then nothing but the rhythm of wheels on tracks and the soft hum of a train carrying her away from everything she'd known. You're out. You're actually out. The thought felt illegal. Dangerous. Like speaking it too loudly might summon him somehow, might make the train stop and turn around, might prove that escape was just another dream she'd wake from with his hands around her throat. She was so lost in her own fear that she didn't notice the man who settled into the seat beside her. Not until the train jolted over a rough section of track and her coat shifted, exposing her face to the overhead light. She flinched, an instinct now, a reflex Raymond had trained into her bones. And that's when she saw him. Tall. Imposing. A sharp black suit that cost more than her old monthly salary, tailored like a second skin. Dark hair, cleanly cut. A face carved from something harder than stone. Sharp jaw, sharper cheekbones, eyes like polished obsidian that reflected the dim light without warmth. But it was his neck that caught her attention. Tattoos climbed above his collar, disappearing into his hairline, intricate black ink, patterns she didn't recognize, marking him as someone who existed in a world far removed from boardrooms and business dinners. He smelled of sandalwood and something colder. Winter, maybe. Or steel. He carried himself like gravity had signed a contract with his bones. Like every space he occupied had already agreed to belong to him. He'd turned his head at the jolt of the train, and now he wasn't turning it back. His eyes found the blood on her face. The bruise blooming across her cheekbone. The split lip she tried to hide behind her hand. Serena's stomach dropped. She knew that look, the curiosity, the judgment, the pity that felt like another kind of violence. But this man didn't look at her like that. He looked at her the way someone looks at a wound they understand. Not with softness. With recognition. Like he'd seen blood before. Caused it, maybe. Survived it, certainly. Without a word, he reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, giving her time to flinch away if she needed to, and produced a handkerchief. Silk. Expensive. Monogrammed with initials she didn't recognize. He held it out to her. Not too close. Not crowding her space. An offering she could refuse. No one should bleed alone, he said. His voice was low, accented, Korean, she thought, though his English was flawless. There was no pity in it. No questions. Just a statement of fact, delivered like he'd learned it the hard way. Serena stared at the handkerchief. At him. At the ink on his neck and the stillness in his posture and the way he waited without expectation. She should refuse. Strangers weren't safe. Men weren't safe. Kindness always came with a price. But God, she was so tired of bleeding alone. She took it. The silk was cool against her lip, softer than anything Raymond had ever given her. She pressed it to the wound and felt something shift in her chest, not hope, not yet, but the faint, terrifying possibility of it. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. Then he turned back toward the aisle, angling his shoulder slightly so it created a wall between her and anyone who might walk past. Protection without presumption. Serena closed her eyes. And for the first time in 8 months, she let someone see her wounds without expecting them to use them against her. They didn't speak for the first hour. Serena kept her eyes closed, the silk handkerchief pressed to her lip, pretending to sleep while her mind raced through every worst-case scenario. The man beside her could be anyone. A trafficker. A predator. Someone who saw a bleeding woman alone and calculated opportunity. But he didn't move closer. Didn't speak. Didn't even glance at her. He simply sat there, a wall of stillness and expensive fabric, giving her space to breathe. It was that, the absence of expectation, that finally made her speak. "Why did you help me?" He turned his head slowly, those obsidian eyes finding hers. "Why does it matter?" "Because people don't help strangers for free. Not in my experience." Something flickered across his face. Not offense. Recognition. "In my experience," he said quietly, "the people who bleed alone are the ones who've learned that help always costs something." He paused. "I'm not asking for payment." "Then what are you asking for?" "Nothing." He turned back toward the aisle. "Sleep. You need it more than conversation." She should have let it go. Should have pressed herself against the window and disappeared into silence until New York. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm running from my husband." The words hung in the air like smoke. He didn't flinch. Didn't offer hollow sympathy. He just nodded once, slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "How far does he reach?" he asked. "Far enough." Her voice cracked. "He has money. Connections. People who owe him favors in places I can't even identify. And New York? I don't know. I don't know anyone there. She swallowed hard. I just needed to get on a train that was leaving. Any train. I didn't think past that." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I have a place. Safe. Anonymous. No one will look for you there." Serena's chest tightened. "I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to." "Why would you?" "Because I can." His voice was flat, final. "And because the man who did that to your face deserves worse than whatever he'll get when he wakes up and finds you gone." She stared at him, this stranger with ink on his neck and winter in his eyes, and felt the impossible. The faint, dangerous urge to trust him. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Kang Junrin." The name settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. The safe house was in Brooklyn. A quiet apartment on a quiet street, clean and sparse and completely anonymous. No name on the mailbox. No neighbors who asked questions. Junrin gave her a key, showed her where the food was, and left without asking for anything in return. Days passed. He checked on her. Brief visits, careful distance. He brought groceries, medical supplies for her healing wounds, and silence when she needed it. On the fourth day, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest. "Who are you, really?" He stood by the window, backlit by gray Brooklyn light, and told her the truth. The Kang Syndicate. Korean organized crime. Operations that stretched from New York to Seoul, built on violence and loyalty and a code she didn't fully understand. He ran it all. Serena waited for the fear to come. The horror. The desperate need to run again. Instead, she watched him carefully wrap fresh bandages around her wrist, gentle, precise, patient, and realized something that terrified her more than any truth he'd just spoken. The most dangerous man she'd ever met touched her wounds like they mattered. Raymond had promised her the world and given her bruises. Junrin had promised her nothing and given her safety. She didn't know what that meant yet. But she was starting to wonder. It started with small questions. "What did you study?" Junrin asked one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter while Serena made tea she didn't really want, just something to do with her hands. "Law." The word felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd forgotten. "I was in my second year when I met Raymond. Constitutional law, civil rights focus. I wanted to help people who couldn't afford to fight for themselves." "What happened?" Serena wrapped her fingers around the warm mug. "He happened. Said I was working too hard. Said I should take a semester off, let him take care of things while I figured out what I really wanted." She laughed bitterly. "By the time I figured out what I wanted was to leave, I couldn't remember how." Junrin said nothing. He just listened, really listened, with those dark eyes that never flinched from hard truths. "The first time he hit me, I convinced myself it was an accident. Too much whiskey, too much stress." He cried afterward. Promised it would never happen again. She set the mug down. "It always happened again." "How long?" 2 years. 8 months of planning to leave. A lifetime of wondering how I became someone who needed to. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Junrin moved to the window, his profile sharp against the city lights. "My father built the syndicate," he said quietly. "He started with nothing. An immigrant with empty pockets and a talent for violence. By the time I was born, he owned half the underground economy between here and Seoul." Serena watched him carefully. "And you inherited it." "I inherited everything. The money. The power. The blood on my hands that will never wash clean." He turned to face her. "I've done things that would make you run if you knew. I've hurt people. Killed people. I tell myself there's a code, that I only destroy those who deserve destruction. But some nights, I wonder if that's just a lie I tell myself so I can sleep." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know who's offering you protection." His jaw tightened. "And because you deserve honesty. Something tells me you haven't had much of that." Serena set down her tea and crossed the small kitchen until she stood in front of him. Close enough to see the faint scar along his jaw. Close enough to smell sandalwood and winter. "You don't belong in my world," he said softly. "You fought too hard to be free. You should run from men like me." "Maybe." She held his gaze. "But you're the first man in years who's told me what I should do instead of what I will do. That's a different kind of cage, the kind that leaves the door open." Something cracked behind his eyes. Something human. "Serena. I know what you are, she said quietly. I'm not naive. But I also know that you've had every opportunity to hurt me, and instead you've done nothing but make sure I heal. The weeks that followed were dangerous in a different way. Late nights on the fire escape, trading stories like secrets. The father who abandoned her. The grandmother who raised her. The ring sewn into her coat that carried a dead woman's hope. He told her about the mother he lost at 12. The first time his father put a gun in his hand. The weight of a legacy he never asked for. 2 people. 2 cages. Both survivors of prisons no one else could see. Neither of them meant to fall. But some walls, once cracked, can't be rebuilt. Raymond found her absence at 6:47 a.m. Serena knew because Junrin's people had eyes on the penthouse, had been watching since the night she arrived in Brooklyn. They reported every move, the moment he woke, the confusion that turned to rage, the systematic destruction of the bedroom that followed. By noon, he'd filed a missing persons report. By evening, his face was on every Atlanta news station, voice cracking with carefully rehearsed concern. My wife is unwell, he told the cameras, eyes glistening with tears that Serena knew were as real as his wedding vows. She's been struggling with mental health issues for some time. I'm begging anyone who's seen her, please, help me bring her home safely. Serena watched the broadcast on the Safe House television, her hands shaking so badly she had to set down her coffee. He's making me look crazy, she whispered. He's rewriting everything. Junrin stood behind her, arms crossed, face unreadable. That's what men like him do. They control the narrative before anyone else can speak. People will believe him. They always believe him. Not everyone. She spun to face him. You don't understand. He has connections everywhere. Politicians, police, judges who owe him favors. He'll hire investigators who don't care about the law. He'll put a bounty on information about me like I'm some kind of. He already has. Junrin's voice was calm. Too calm. $50,000 for confirmed information about your location. My people intercepted the request this morning. The floor tilted beneath her feet. Then it's only a matter of time. I have to run again. I have to disappear somewhere he'll never know. The word cut through her panic like a blade. Junrin crossed the room and stood before her, close enough that she could see the controlled fury burning behind his eyes. You've been running for 8 months. Running while he hurt you. Running while you planned. Running the night you boarded that train. His voice dropped. You're done running. He'll find me. He'll try. Something cold flickered across his face. My people are already feeding false leads to his investigators. Dead ends. Ghost sightings in cities you've never been. By the time he untangles the lies, we'll be ready. Ready for what? To destroy him. Serena stared at him. What do you mean? Raymond Price isn't just an abuser. He's a fraud. His developments are built on bribery, corruption, and money that disappears into accounts no auditor has ever seen. Junrin pulled out his phone, scrolling through documents she couldn't read from this distance. I've had people digging for 3 days. What they've found would end careers, collapse empires, and put him in prison for decades. How do you know all this? Because men like Raymond always think they're untouchable. His eyes met hers. They never expect someone worse than them to be watching. Serena's breath caught. You're going to expose him. I'm going to give you the evidence. What you do with it is your choice. He stepped closer. But I'm not letting you face him alone. Not now. Not ever. She should have been frightened by the intensity in his voice. By the violence coiled beneath his stillness. By the implication of what he was capable of. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Protected. Not owned. Not controlled. Not trapped. Protected. Why? She whispered. Why do you care this much? Junrin was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it. Because someone should have done this for my mother. And no one did. It happened slowly. Then all at once. A brush of fingers when he handed her coffee in the morning. The way his eyes lingered a moment too long before he looked away. The careful distance he kept, always close enough to protect, never close enough to presume. Serena told herself she was imagining it. Told herself the flutter in her chest was gratitude, nothing more. Told herself that falling for another powerful man would be the most dangerous thing she could do. But then came the night on the fire escape. The city hummed below them, Brooklyn spread out like a quilt of lights and shadows. Serena sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the autumn air cool against her skin, and found herself talking about things she hadn't spoken of in years. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. Car accident, I was 7. She traced a finger along the railing. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. Worked 2 jobs, never complained, never let me see her cry. She used to say, "Baby girl, the world will try to break you. Don't you let it." Junrin sat beside her, close but not touching, his profile sharp against the city glow. She sounds remarkable. She was. Serena's voice cracked. She died my junior year of college. Left me nothing but her ring and her faith that I'd become something. She pressed her hand to her coat, where the ring was still sewn into the lining. Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of me now. Running from a man I let break me anyway. You're not broken. His voice was low, fierce. You survived. You're still surviving. That's not weakness, that's war. She turned to look at him then, really look, and found his eyes already on her. Dark. Intense. Burning with something that made her breath catch. Junrin. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. He kissed her. Or maybe she kissed him. Later, she wouldn't remember who moved first. Only that his hands cupped her face like she was something precious, something fragile, something worth protecting. Only that his lips were softer than she expected, warm against the cold night air. Only that she kissed him back like she was drowning and he was the first breath she'd taken in years. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads touching, breath mingling in the space between them, reality crashed back in. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know. I don't know if I can trust my own judgment anymore. The last time I fell for someone powerful. I'm not him." His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle over the fading bruise. "I will never be him." "How do I know that?" "You don't." His honesty was brutal. "You won't know until time proves it. But I'm willing to wait." The next morning, his lieutenant Sang-hoon found him in the study. "She's making you vulnerable, boss." Sang-hoon's voice was careful, measured. "Your enemies will notice. They'll use her against you." Junrin didn't look up from the documents on his desk. "Let them." "Sir." "I said let them." His voice was ice. "Anyone who touches her answers to me. Make sure every family from here to Seoul understands that." Sang-hoon hesitated, then nodded and left. Alone, Junrin closed his eyes and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years, something other than duty, violence, and the crushing weight of his father's legacy. Hope. Across the apartment, Serena stared at herself in the bathroom mirror and asked the question she was terrified to answer. Am I falling for another dangerous man? Or is this one different? She didn't know yet. But for the first time in years, she wanted to find out. The call came at 3 a.m. Junrin answered on the first ring, his voice sharp even in the darkness. Serena watched from the bedroom doorway as his expression shifted. From alert to cold to something that looked almost like satisfaction. How much does he know? A pause. And the feds? Another pause. Good. Let him come. He hung up and turned to find her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, already knowing. He found me. It wasn't a question. His investigators traced you to New York 3 days ago. They've been watching the safe house since yesterday. Junrin's voice was calm. Too calm. He knows about me. About the syndicate. He thinks he's found leverage. The floor tilted beneath her feet. What does that mean? It means he's contacted the FBI. Fed them information about my operations, some accurate, some fabricated. He's positioning himself as the concerned husband trying to rescue his mentally unstable wife from dangerous criminals. The words hit her like fists. Mentally unstable. Dangerous criminals. Rescue. Raymond was rewriting her story again. Turning her escape into his heroism. Transforming her survival into her sickness. He's going to destroy me, she whispered. He's going to make everyone believe I'm crazy, and then he's going to drag me back, and this time he won't stop until... Serena. Junrin crossed the room and took her hands, his grip firm and grounding. Look at me. She looked. He thinks he's the hunter, Junrin said quietly, his dark eyes burning with cold fire. He doesn't know he's walking into a trap. The press conference aired the next evening. Raymond stood behind a podium bristling with microphones, his face arranged in perfect anguish. The concerned husband. The victim of circumstance. The man just trying to save the woman he loved. My wife has been manipulated by dangerous people, he said, voice cracking at precisely the right moments. She was vulnerable, struggling with mental health issues I tried to help her address. And now she's fallen in with a criminal organization that's using her against me. He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. I'm begging the authorities to help me bring her home safely. And I'm begging Serena, if you can hear this, baby, please. Come back to me. I forgive you. I just want you safe. Serena watched from the safe house, her nails digging crescents into her palms, her stomach churning with a fear so familiar it felt like coming home. He's good, she said hollowly. He's so good at this. People will believe him. They always believe him. Junrin stood behind her, his reflection a dark silhouette in the television screen. Let them believe. For now. For now. He reached past her and turned off the television. When she turned to face him, his expression was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with something that made her breath catch. Raymond Price has spent his entire life controlling narratives. Buying silence. Making problems disappear. Junrin's voice was quiet, lethal. He's never faced someone who operates the way I do. What are you going to do? I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, a war. A cold smile touched his lips. And then I'm going to make sure he loses everything. His reputation. His empire. His freedom. He stepped closer. By the time I'm done, the whole world will know exactly what he is. And you'll never have to run again. The fear didn't disappear. But beside it, something else took root. Faith. In him. In herself. In the fight they were about to wage together. Tell me what to do, she said. Junrin's eyes softened for just a moment. Survive. Heal. And when the time comes, tell your truth. The destruction of Raymond Price began with a single email. Sent simultaneously to every major news outlet, every federal prosecutor who'd ever investigated Atlanta corruption, every politician who'd accepted his donations and looked the other way. The attachments were meticulous. Bank records showing decades of fraud, recordings of bribes paid to city officials, security footage from the penthouse that showed exactly what Raymond did behind closed doors. And the medical records. Years of them. Emergency room visits Serena didn't even remember, documented by nurses who'd noted the injuries and the husband who always had an explanation. By morning, Raymond's face was everywhere, but not the way he'd planned. Real estate mogul accused of fraud, bribery, domestic abuse. Price empire crumbles as evidence emerges. Wife's medical records paint picture of years of violence. Serena watched the coverage in silence, tears streaming down her face, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Believed. The world was finally seeing what she'd survived. Raymond came for her on the third day. He'd lost everything, his accounts frozen, his allies abandoning him, his carefully constructed reputation in ashes. Desperate men do desperate things. He tracked the safe house through sheer determination and the last investigator still willing to take his money. But Junrin had been waiting for exactly this. His people intercepted Raymond before he reached Brooklyn, fed him false information, led him on a chase that ended exactly where Junrin wanted it to end. The rooftop of Raymond's own building in Atlanta. Fitting. Poetic. Final. When Raymond burst through the rooftop door, expecting to find Serena cowering and alone, he found Junrin instead, standing at the edge, the Atlanta skyline glittering behind him, his dark suit sharp against the night. "Where is she?" Raymond's voice was ragged, unhinged. The polished businessman was gone, only the monster remained. "Where's my wife?" "She's not your wife anymore." Junrin's voice was ice. "She's not your property. She's not your victim. She's free. She belongs to me." Raymond lunged. Junrin moved like water, fluid, precise, devastating. He didn't need weapons. His fury was enough. Every strike was controlled, surgical, designed to wound without killing. He fought the way he lived, with a code that demanded consequences but refused to grant the mercy of a quick end. Within seconds, Raymond was on the ground, gasping, blood streaming from his nose, his arm bent at an angle that made Serena, watching from the security feed in Brooklyn, look away. Junrin crouched beside him, close enough for Raymond to see the cold fire in his eyes. "You spent your whole life owning people," he said quietly. "Controlling them. Breaking them. Convincing yourself that power meant you could take whatever you wanted." He grabbed Raymond's jaw, forcing eye contact. "You were wrong. You don't own people. You never did. And now everyone knows exactly what you are." Sirens rose from the streets below. Junrin's people had made the call 10 minutes ago. Timed perfectly. The police would find Raymond on the rooftop of his own empire, surrounded by evidence of his crimes, with no narrative left to spin. Junrin stood, straightened his jacket, and walked away without looking back. Behind him, Raymond Price screamed curses into the night, but no one was listening anymore. The hunter had become the hunted. And Serena, watching from 500 miles away, finally let herself breathe. It's over. It's finally over. Raymond Price was arrested on his own rooftop, surrounded by the ruins of everything he'd built. The trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming: fraud, bribery, tax evasion, and years of documented abuse that made headlines across the country. Serena testified twice, her voice steady, her shoulders straight, her grandmother's ring now worn openly on her finger instead of hidden in a coat lining. She told her truth. And the world believed her. Raymond was sentenced to 23 years. His empire dissolved. His name became synonymous with the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. Serena watched the verdict from the back of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Freedom. She returned to law school that fall. It wasn't easy. 2 years away from academia, a lifetime of trauma she was still unpacking, and the constant whisper of doubt that told her she didn't belong. But she showed up anyway. Every class. Every exam. Every late night in the library when her hands shook and her mind wandered to dark places. She graduated with honors. The foundation came next, the Serena Miles Legal Aid Initiative, dedicated to helping women navigate the legal system to escape abuse. Pro bono attorneys. Safe housing assistance. Court advocates who understood that leaving was only the first step. Junrin funded it quietly. No name attached. No credit claimed. Just deposits that appeared in the foundation's account like clockwork, enough to help hundreds of women find the freedom Serena had fought so hard to claim. But he kept his distance. You deserve a life in the light, he told her the last time they spoke, his voice rough with something that sounded like goodbye. A life without shadows. Without looking over your shoulder. Without me. She'd wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that light meant nothing without someone to share it with. But he was gone before she could find the words. Graduation day arrived wrapped in spring sunshine and the scent of blooming magnolias. Serena walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. You did it, baby girl. You didn't let them break you. Afterward, she slipped away from the crowds, the classmates who wanted photos, the professors who offered congratulations, the reporters who still wanted her story. She walked outside, into the quiet of the afternoon, and stopped. He was there. Black suit, sharp as always. Neck tattoos climbing above his collar. Eyes soft but full of fire, watching her like she was the only person in the world. You came, she whispered. Junrin stepped closer. I told you I don't run from what matters. You said I deserved a life without shadows. You do. His voice was rough. But I realized something these past months. You don't need me to protect you from darkness. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. You've learned to walk through it on your own. Serena took his hand, the same hand that had offered her a silk handkerchief on a train, that had bandaged her wounds, that had destroyed an empire to set her free. I'm not afraid of your shadows, she said softly. I learned to carry my own. He looked at her then, this woman who had survived everything, who had rebuilt herself from ruins, who stood in the light on her own terms, and for the first time, he didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like a man who had finally found home. Then we walked together, he said. She smiled, real, bright, unbroken. Together. And as the spring sun warmed their faces and the future stretched before them like an open road, they walked forward. Side by side, shadow and light, two survivors who had found something neither expected. Each other. Sometimes God sends help in unexpected forms. Sometimes angels have tattoos and shadows. Sometimes the train you board to escape one nightmare leads you straight to the person who'll help you heal. If you believe that God places people in our path for a reason, type divine timing in the comments. Subscribe if this story made you cry, made you hope, made you believe that better days are coming. I read every single one comments. And if this story made you feel something, hit subscribe. More stories like this are coming.